And I am going to be completely honest here, I have been looking forward to it. The highly anticipated 2023 movie releases today, and critics have had some pretty stellar things to say about it. Some have gone on to say that they absolutely loved it, and others, I kid you not, have said that it's a real blast. And there's even more good news for this movie. The projections from the box office are all pointing to this one being a massive hit. It is too soon to say for certain, but I am calling it now, $1 billion worldwide. And how can it not? Anyone who is anyone is going to see it.
Right, mate, what do you want? One ticket, please. For Barbie. Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind Reviews. In this video I'm about to see if life in plastic really is fantastic as we take a look at the first ever live action film of Barbie. Released in 2023 and directed by Greta Gerwig, the movie sees Barbie suffering a crisis that leads her to question her world and her own existence. Co-written by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, the movie features an all-star cast including Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, America Ferrera, Ariana Greenblatt, Issa Rae, Kate McKinnon, Alexandra Shipp, Emma McKay, Harry Neff, Sharon Rooney, Simu Liu, Anna Cruz Kane, Rita Aria, Kingsley Ben-Adir, Ncuti Gatwa, Will Ferrell, Helen Mirren and Michael Cera. This might come as a slight shock to you, but I didn't grow up with Barbie, or Action Man either to be honest. But I knew who the character was and I did recognise the brand, especially because I did see a lot of adverts for it on TV, or whenever I used to visit Toys R Us I'd always see the aisles just stacked to the rooftop full of Barbie dolls. I miss those days. So I was fully aware of Barbie. Plus the Toy Story movies are some of my favourite films that have ever been made, and Barbie and Ken both had roles in those films. I know there has been a lot of animated Barbie movies and TV shows that have been released over the years, none of which I've seen. And there was never any real appeal to me either, so when Warner Bros announced that they were going to be doing a live action movie, initially with Amy Schumer, I wasn't interested. But I will admit I was kind of curious on what it is that they were going to do. And when this movie did start going into development and they started announcing the cast with Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling both being involved, I did start becoming a lot more interested in seeing what this movie was going to be like. And then that teaser trailer dropped. I had absolutely no idea what it was for. The first time I saw that teaser trailer that pays homage to 2001 A Space Odyssey, I was at the cinema watching Ant-Man, I think. It was in the IMAX, so it might have been Ant-Man. Anyway, and I've got to admit, I was really confused. I honestly thought that it was a trailer for an upcoming Annabelle sequel that I didn't know anything about. And then when Margot Robbie steps out as Barbie and we get a glimpse of Barbie Land, not only did I go, oh, that's what it's meant to be. That was the thing that sold me on giving this film a go. And I do need to mention the marketing team. They genuinely did a fantastic job of building up hype surrounding this movie. They really did market this movie and advertise it really well. They even gave Oppenheimer a little bit of a boost too. So on the day it was released, I went to the cinema with a friend and we both gave it a go. And I have never seen so many people wearing pink in my life. And as for the film, it's actually not bad. The story for this movie sees Barbie along with Ken travelling to the real world to meet a mother and daughter when Barbie begins to have a crisis. Meanwhile, in the real world, Ken discovers the patriarchy and sets about trying to reshape Barbie Land. So essentially what you have in this movie is two different stories that are happening at the exact same time, and they do meet up towards the end of the movie, but for me there is definitely a bit of a disconnect between both Barbie's story and Ken's story. The stories are kept relatively simple and there are moments where it can become a bit deeper. I mean, a lot deeper than you think it would be. But to me the movie feels a lot more focused on the messages that it's trying to tell rather than the characters or the story that you are led to believe that the movie will be about. And that's the story between the mother and the daughter. I liked what it was that they were trying to do with that aspect of this movie, but it doesn't quite have as much focus as it should. And it does have to compete with a lot of other much more dominant elements, such as the stuff with Mattel and all the stuff going on with Ken. I will admit it is quite a funny idea having Mattel actually have a presence in this, and they are able to have have some fun with it, almost to the point where I did question if Mattel genuinely were okay with it all. But to me, it doesn't really feel necessary and actually does distract from everything else. And there is a point in the movie where none of the Mattel staff are on screen for a large chunk of time, and then they show up later, and I'll be completely honest, I forgot they were even in this. The stuff I remember the most about this movie is the Ken storyline, where Ryan Gosling's Ken comes to the real world with Barbie, and he discovers the patriarchy, and he discovers how male dominated the real world is, and how a horse is just an extension of the man. I've never heard that before in my life. And he decides to take everything that he's learned back to Barbie Land, which is a place that is completely run by the Barbies, and without spoiling it, things just escalate from there. It is a fun idea, it brings up conversations, and it does lead to some pretty alright comedy. But I do think that there are a lot of missed opportunities, and it does skip over a few things that happen. We do see Ken returning to Barbie Land with a handful of books that he picked up at a library. But then later on, when Barbie returns to Barbie Land, it's completely changed Back to the Future style. And I did question what it was that happened within that time. So I do think that it is entertaining overall, but it does leave a bit to be desired. I think both of the main stories that they are trying to tell could both be equally entertaining all on their own, but mashing the two together does mean that they struggle to get the right amount of attention individually, and they can take the focus away from the other, especially since this movie is just under 2 hours and there isn't enough time to explore them both fully. But one of the biggest positives that I can say about this movie is the cast, especially Margot Robbie as Barbie and Ryan Gosling as Ken. They are both absolutely perfect for their roles. Margot is basically playing the stereotypical Barbie, and she gets to lean into the cheesier comedic side of things that you would expect from a film like this. But I was quite surprised that she has several dramatic and emotional scenes, and are actually really good, and a large part of that is because of Margot's performance. She is absolutely the perfect choice for this role, and I don't think anybody thought that she wouldn't be, and her performance overall is absolutely fantastic. And as for Ryan Gosling as Ken, I don't think anyone will deny that they thought he would be the scene stealer of this film, and he absolutely is. He gets most of the funniest scenes, and Ryan is fantastic and gets to really show off his comedy chops, his dancing skills, and his singing abilities too. But just like Barbie, he also gets to have a few more emotional and dramatic scenes as well, and they are really good. I personally don't think they're treated as seriously as a lot of Barbie's more dramatic scenes, and they are a lot more over the top, but Ryan's performance is genuinely great throughout. Most of the cast in this are pretty good, with some pretty big names making small cameos here and there, like Simu Liu, Kate McKinnon as Weird Barbie, John Cena and Dua Lipa as mermaids, Doctor Who himself, Ncuti Gatwa, and even Helen Mirren as the narrator. There's far too many for me to go over in this review, but one of the standouts for me is America Ferrera, who's playing the mother that Barbie is trying to help in the real world. She's really good in this movie overall. I do think the performance is really good, and she does get to play around with some of the more serious and more comedic elements of the role. But then you also have Michael Cera making a little cameo appearance in this as a discontinued toy called Alan. It's not a large role at all, but he does get some laughs and is definitely a memorable character. I do need to mention Will Ferrell making an appearance in this movie as the head of Mattel, because look, I love Will Ferrell, and he does get some laughs here and there with his over-the-top deliveries, but he adds nothing to this story, and as I said, there are large sections of this movie where neither he nor any of the Mattel executives are on screen, and you do forget that they're even in this. I'll be completely honest, I was absolutely convinced that he was going to be playing Lord Business again. I also think it's weird that most of their scenes are set within the real world, and yet these scenes feel like a cartoon. I'll be honest, a lot of the scenes that take place within the real world in this movie do feel like a cartoon, and there are a lot of scenes that do feature some really exaggerated scenarios. So for me, the contrast between the two worlds, the real world and Barbie Land, doesn't quite feel as jarring as it really should be. The scenes in this movie with the Mattel staff I think are very unnecessary, and I think that they could have either been changed or removed altogether. But back to the cast overall, it does feel like they just got everybody that they possibly could to expand the cast out a lot more, which is fine. But there are a lot of characters in this movie that I think that they could have done a lot more with. But it does look like everyone is having an absolute blast making this movie. This does look like it would have been a fun one to work on, especially the scenes on the Malibu beach. I've got to talk about how it is that Barbie Land is brought to life in this movie. It's established in this film that Barbie Land is its own separate place from the real world, but if someone in the real world is playing with a Barbie doll, then it impacts the Barbies in Barbie Land. I'll be honest, I did find the rules a little bit confusing, and I'll be completely honest, this is me being very nitpicky here. I do question just how much influence each world does have on the feel that especially towards the second half of the movie, the little area where Margot Robbie's Barbie lives, because she interacts with all the other people that live around her, does that mean that they all belong to the exact same person? Because you're more than likely going to have more than one figure in a playset. Plus, what happens if you mix the characters with other brands? This is Warner Brothers at the end of the day, and a lot of their movies, especially recently, do feature a lot of references to other Warner Brothers properties, so I think that that could have actually been a really fun thing to add into this. Plus, you do have a lot of other figures that do make appearances in this, like Alan, and there's even another decommissioned Barbie that makes a little appearance as well. So I do think that they could have had a little bit more fun with what other characters could have made appearances in this, because as far as I'm aware, Barbie does produce figures that are based on characters from other movies and other franchises, so I think that that could have been something that they could have acknowledged in this. So to me that does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity, but it might have distracted from the overall plot, so I do understand why it is that they wouldn't have done that, but I think that they could have acknowledged it somewhere. All of that aside, I do think that the work that has gone into making these sequences, all the stuff in Barbie Land, is incredibly creative and really imaginative. Not just the look of it, and I'll definitely come back to that in a minute, but even what the characters do. They move around and interact with things like dolls. Barbie's house doesn't have stairs, so anytime she has to get from the top floor down to the ground, she just floats in the way that kids would play with them. Some of the characters go limp and bend the way that a Barbie doll would, especially Weird Barbie, played by Kate McKinnon, who's meant to be a version of Barbie that's been messed up with hair sliced off and she's been constantly doing the splits. I did admittedly find it quite funny that there's a scene where it's very obviously a stunt double does a cartwheel off screen and then Kate McKinnon steps back into shot. It feels like those old parody movies where it's very clearly not the actor doing it and it's just played up more for laughs. I don't know if that is the case here or not, but it is funny when it does happen. And then throughout the movie they even acknowledge the weird shaped feet that Barbies have as well, because the toys are designed to wear high heels, so all the Barbies walk on tiptoes and we get that infamous Tarantino-esque shot from the trailer. It is simple and it is actually quite a clever idea, and I do like that they do acknowledge it and they do play around with it. They really have done a load of research for these scenes. There's so much detail throughout too, like there's no water or food, it's all imaginary. The props that they use are all plastic looking, they seem to be either too big or very simply designed, just like you would normally get in a toy set. The backdrops look like artwork that you see on a toy box, and then there's the set design itself, which is just incredible. And I've actually seen a few behind the scenes videos of how it is that they brought this world to life, and I'm amazed just how much practical work has actually gone into this, and it really does pay off. It looks absolutely amazing, and there's always something either really interesting or eye-catching in shot. And there's a lot of pink too, and I mean a lot of pink. So much so that reportedly there was actually a national shortage of pink paint because of how much they were using for this movie. Now, as I said, even though I'm not really that familiar with the Barbie brand overall, there are a few things that I do recognise here and there. I do remember in my younger days when I used to watch things on Cartoon Network and Jetix and Boomerang that I would see a lot of adverts for different Barbie play sets and figures and all sorts, including the one with the dog where you basically like walk it and then you feed it and then you like click its tail or something and then it like poops them out. I've always been kind of shocked just how many toys that are geared more towards girls that feature pee and poo. And they say all the boys' toys with all the slime monsters and goo are gross. Anyway, there are a load of references in this movie to different playsets and figures that you can get from this franchise. I'm sure if you are somebody who did collect Barbie when you were younger, or if you still do, there are definitely going to be a lot of things that you will recognise. I did find it funny that there is a scene where there's a load of clothes getting thrown out of a window, and every time something gets thrown out they kind of like stop in mid-air and then a tag pops up with the name of them. And the one thing that I noticed during those scenes is that it is done all practically, like they are on wires and everything. It is done for real. And I genuinely was surprised just how much this movie was actually practical, because there are a lot of various effects used throughout, and if there is any CGI that is incorporated into this movie, it's nothing really too noticeable and it's only really used here and there just to kind of enhance things. So I will say that the effects overall in this movie are actually pretty good, especially how they do play into the more cartoonish elements. Now they actually feature 2D elements like explosions and dust rather than 3D, and that does surprisingly work pretty well for the aesthetic and visuals, and it doesn't look out of place. Now when it comes to the comedy in this movie, the movie is advertised and billed as a comedy first and foremost, and for the most part it does maintain that, and it does try and be as much of a comedy as it can be. The story and tone that they have gone for does maintain as much lightness and playfulness as it really can, but I do think that the comedy can be very hit and miss. There are some absolutely brilliant jokes in this movie that will get you to laugh, and a lot of that does involve Ken. And then there's some other jokes in this movie that are actually quite unexpected. Without outright saying what it is, there is a moment later on in the movie where they do kind of break the fourth wall. It is a little bit out of place for me. It is funny, it is a really funny scene. It definitely got one of the biggest responses from my audience. But considering most of the movie, well, none of the movie has actually done any sort of fourth wall breaking whatsoever, it does feel out of place. But when it comes to the rest of the comedy, I do think that outside of those scenes involving Ken or that other scene, I do think that the comedy is very hit and miss, and I just don't think it's anywhere near as funny as this should have been. I think the most surprising thing about this movie for me was that there are actually some really touching and heartfelt scenes where like all the riotous shenanigans kind of take a bit of a back seat and all the heartfelt stuff is allowed to be brought to the forefront. I think the most touching scenes all do involve Margot Robbie in some way, and I do think that they are really well handled, especially one scene involving an old lady which director Greta Gerwig actually said that she was told to cut originally, and I'm really glad that they didn't, because it is a really nice scene and it does add an extra layer to this film. Now I do need to bring up the messages that are conveyed in this movie, because it isn't just like a small part of this movie, it is a big part of the story overall, to the point where the entire third act is built around them. There's messages about feminism, the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, anxieties, corporations and businesses, relationships between mothers and daughters. And while I do like some elements of it, I do think that there is too much going on, to the point where it does start to feel very heavy-handed, and to me it feels like the writers were more prioritising these messages over the characters. The characters do learn stuff and they do change by the end of the film, but it is really late on when all of this stuff comes together with a number of really big monologues, and because it's been trying to balance all of these elements throughout a 2-hour runtime, it can be a bit all over the place. So I do get and appreciate what it was that they were trying to do in this movie, but for me it is a lot, it does feel very heavy-handed, and I don't think that it all meshes together as well as it should. Now when it comes to the music for this movie, we have a score composed by Mark Ronson and Andrew Wyatt, and it's actually alright. The main theme that is featured throughout this movie I do think is actually alright, and I do think that it is quite catchy and memorable, and I think part of that is because it is actually featured within the marketing and all the trailers. The overall soundtrack I do think works quite well for the movie, and it does liven up a few scenes here and there, but it's not as memorable as that main theme is. The songs, however, even though they're not really all my thing, I do think are alright. There is definitely a bit of a disco-y vibe with a few of the songs that they do use in this movie, and it does fit the overall vibe of the film. And like the main theme, I do think that they are memorable. It even turns into a musical at one point, which is admittedly a little bit random, when Ken starts singing about being just Ken. But it is a funny scene and it is really catchy with some great visuals. But the real question is Barbie Girl by Aqua in this movie? Not really. There is a remix of it in the credits by Nicki Minaj, but that's about it. You don't get the official song all on its own. Shameful. 1 out of 10. Joking aside, I do think that it is good that they do acknowledge it at some point in this movie, but I do think that they could have used it properly somewhere in this film. Would I recommend this movie? It really depends, to be honest. For me, I don't really think this movie is for me, but I know that there are a lot of people that have seen this movie that have absolutely loved it. I do think it is a fun movie overall. There is a lot of good stuff in it that I will say that I think that you will have a good time. So I do think that this movie is worth checking out, especially if you are curious about it. But I don't necessarily think that this is a must-watch movie, and as I said, this isn't going to be for everyone. I know there are going to be a lot of young kids out there, a lot of young girls that are going to be really excited about seeing this movie, and I get it, because it's Barbie. That being said, this movie definitely is not aimed at kids. It is rated a 12A in the UK or PG-13 in the US, so there are some more adult themes, some slower sequences and some very risque jokes that will definitely go over kids' heads. This movie is definitely aimed at older audiences, and I do think that younger viewers will have trouble sitting through a few of the more slower sequences, but there isn't anything too bad or too grown up for them if they genuinely do want to see it. Overall, I think this is a fun movie with some clever ideas, brilliant set and costume design, some good music and an excellent cast. But I do think that the story could have used some work, and they needed to either extend the runtime to explore each of the stories in more detail or remove a few elements that don't feel necessary to the plot. The comedy in this movie can be hit and miss, and I do think that the messages being conveyed, while well intentioned, can be a bit too heavy handed. That being said, I think people will enjoy this for what it is, especially if you're looking for something fun to watch with friends. So with all that being said, my rating for Barbie is 7 out of 10. Well, I think I'm going to leave this video there. So if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that is going on here. If you have seen Barbie, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like me to do, let me know down below. I will be completing the epic Barbenheimer saga with my review for Oppenheimer, and that will be out very soon, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.